escape. A cacophony of sounds rang through the dungeon as the fortress sprang to life above them. Rakan's heart pounded and his mind raced as he searched for some way out of the trap they found themselves in. The stairs seemed to be the only way out, and it seemed beyond unlikely that they would be able to get through the masses of Dash that were no doubt already headed their way. "I know where we must go," a strange voice said. He turned and to his surprise saw that the words had come from Sakana. The blind man lifted his hand and pointed further into the dungeon. "We must go that way." For a moment Rakan remained still, confused by the situation. Where did this sudden confidence come from? He did not even recognize the voice that came from the old prisoner. How could we trust the guidance of a blind man? "Are you crazy?" Uruk asked. "There's nothing back there but more cells. Not that you can see it anyway. Are we really going to follow a blind man to another corner?" Sakana did not wait for them, but began to walk down the dark hallway himself. Gone was the shambling man who walked slowly with his arms out. Suddenly, Sakana walked with confidence and speed, as if somehow able to see all that was around him. "Well," Peleus said, "I guess we should follow him. What other choice do we have? Maybe if nothing else we can find a more defensible position." Rakan shook his head in disbelief, and then followed the blind man and the Magi down the dark hallway. The others followed, though with little confidence. The noise of the oncoming Dash grew louder, even as the stench of death and decay increased. The company moved faster as Rakan saw his shadow form from the torches of their pursuers. Suddenly Sakana came to a halt. "Keys," he said as he motioned with his hand. Rakan placed the keys in the blind man's hands. He crouched low, and Rakan saw a trap door built into the floor. It was 6 feet long and 4 feet across, and looked wholly out of place. "Why would they put a trap door in a dungeon?" Belethor asked. Sakana finished unlocking the door and turned to Belethor, looking into his eyes with his empty sockets. "It's not a trap door." Sakana leapt into the opening, and a moment later they heard a sickening crunch as he landed. "Quickly, you have little time," he called from below. Rakan peered down the hole, but could see nothing. There were no torches down there, nor windows. Rakan looked at the others, shrugged, then leapt into the darkness himself. He fell for a moment before landing with a strange combination of a crunch and a splash. The putrid smell of decay surrounded him, and he realized with horror the purpose of the door. He stood to his feet and moved away from where he landed as he called for the next jumper. In no time, they had all leapt to the bottom of the pit. "Quickly, follow the sound of my voice," Sakana said. Rakan carefully obeyed, taking each step slowly forward in the dark. A few times he tripped and fell into the fetid remains, but soon they made their way out of the pile of bodies. Rakan could just barely make out a light in the distance as they continued to move forward. "They jumped in the pit!" came a cry from behind them. They began to run forward, far more concerned with their pursuers than the threat of tripping and falling. To Rakan's surprise, he did not hear any Dash jump down behind them. His eyes widened as he realized their plan. "Move quickly," he said to the group. "They mean to come around and trap us in here. We have to make it out before they can." Uruk ran through the dark tunnel toward the light and wondered if he was doing the right thing. He had been presented with many opportunities to betray these people, and not very long ago he would have done so without hesitation. Why did he continue to work with them? These humans, dwellers, and magi were so very different than the Dash he knew. He knew that his Dash brothers would have killed him as soon as they had no use for him, but these people had given him a chance. Despite having attacked them with intentions to kill them, now he walked unbound among them. Uruk shook his head and pressed forward. Now was not the time for such thinking. Soon the Dash would surround and kill them all, and none of it would matter anyway. The company broke through into the light of day, which burned Uruk's eyes as he squinted from its brightness. He looked to both sides and saw that the Dash had not yet come around the fortress. Perhaps luck was on their side after all. Peleus leapt gracefully to the top of a nearby rock formation and peered around them. A grin appeared on his face. "I know where we are. My escape tunnel isn't far from here. Looks like our blind man led us right." I don't," Sakana stuttered. I don't know where that came from. Someone help me. I can't see. Where are we? Where are we going?" Uruk's stomach turned at his weakness. If it were up to him, they would have left him in that dungeon, or better yet, they would have killed him and put him out of his misery. Yet, without the blind man, they would never have made it out alive. It seemed as though these men were determined to prove everything Uruk had believed to be true about the world as falsehoods. Peleus leapt down from his perch and motioned east of their position. We need to move quickly for this to work. Rakan, grab Sakana and guide him. Everyone else, follow me. The Magi took off sprinting as the others raced to keep up with him. As they rounded the corner of the dark fortress, Urg's heart sank. Legions of Desh were approaching fast from the other side of the building. A group ran forward as Peleus guided them to a narrow path between two large rock formations. The path was no more than 10 feet wide and would serve well to keep the Desh from surrounding them. Even still, the Desh were gaining ground on them. As the tunnel came into view, Peleus hung back for a moment and fired a few shots into the approaching army. A few of the Desh fell. Urg felt his legs burning as he pressed forward, the exhaustion of their escape beginning to wear on him. He looked back at Peleus as he lowered his bow and continued to run. Suddenly, Urg lost his footing and fell to the ground. Winded, he turned to his back and peered at the spinning sky above him. The ground rumbled with the footsteps of the innumerable Desh that came with swords drawn, ready to cut him to pieces where he lay. Urg realized that this was no doubt the end. What had it all meant if he was to die here on the ground, just as he was coming to realize how different the world was from what he had thought? To his surprise, he felt a hand grip him by the forearm as Peleus lifted him to his feet. "You are not done yet," Peleus said as he pushed Urg forward. Urg was not about to lose this chance as he frantically ran into the mouth of the tunnel. He stopped and turned as he passed into the darkness to see that Peleus was not following him. With a smile, the Magi drew back his bow and aimed for something just above the tunnel's entrance. He let loose an arrow just as the host of Desh began to surround him. Rumbling sounds resounded through the tunnel as rocks began to fall over the entrance. Urg stood in silence as the rocks buried them within the tunnel. The torch erupted into flame in Rakan's hand and lit the tunnel with orange light. He heard scraping sounds from the other side of the rubble. No doubt the Desh were trying to dig them out. What just happened, he thought. Where did those stones come from? His heart sank as he realized they were missing someone. "Where is Peleus?" Urg said. "He didn't make it." For a moment, the only sound in the tunnel was the digging. "We haven't time to mourn," Dervish said. "We have to get moving or we'll be joining Peleus much sooner than planned." So Rakan grabbed Sakana by the arm and began to run down the long, dark tunnel as fast as he could manage without extinguishing their torchlight. For hours they continued on, running until they could no longer keep up the pace, and then slowing to a walk once again. Soon they would regain the energy to run, beginning the cycle anew. For the entirety of this frantic running they moved in silence. Rakan was sure they were silent out of shock from what had just happened. He was silent from respect for Peleus alone. This was far from the first time that Rakan had lost an ally, and he was sure it wouldn't be his last. In the monotony of their journey, Rakan reflected on the kind of man he knew Peleus to be. He knew so little about him, apart from the reputation that preceded him. He knew his prowess in battle, but not the journey that had brought him there. He knew that the man cared deeply for justice and truth, but not what had inspired such depth of character. Rakan wondered about the Hand of Fire. He knew even less about the enigmatic group that he had known about their leader. How important was Peleus to their operation? What would they do without him? Had he named a successor? Sadness crept into Rakan's heart when he thought about the fact that none of his comrades were with him when he went down. He dreaded the coming moment when he would have to explain to the others of his untimely demise. He wondered if Peleus left behind any children. For that matter, Magi did not age, so he wondered if Peleus's parents were alive to mourn him. Rakan shook his head and pressed on. Now that they knew what threat awaited them in the fortress, it was time to plan. He would have to summon a war council. Treaties would have to be made. Their mission was over, but the time for war was still approaching. Exhausted and panting for breath, they emerged after many hours from the other side of the tunnel. The sun had long set while they were still underground, but the moon shone bright above them in the sky. Rakan let go of Sakana and plopped down to the ground. "No sign of the Desh," Dervish said. "Perhaps they gave up," Belethor said. "They probably realized we had gone too far for them to catch up in time." "Whatever the case," Rakan said, "we can't go on. We need to set up camp somewhere nearby. We'll take watches just in case they haven't given up pursuit, but we must rest. I'll take first watch." Rakan looked around the group and realized that something was wrong. Peleus was not the only one among them to have gone missing. He peered back into the cave and looked around frantically. "Where has Urg gone?" Urg began to fall behind the group, his pace slowing by the moment until finally he stood. Rakan and his torch soon disappeared in the distance, leaving the half-Desh to stand alone in the dark. There was something soothing about the dark, and about the hollow silence that grew as the others gained distance from him. A recurring image gnawed at his mind, unrelenting in its attack on his conscience. He fell. Peleus pushed him forward. Rocks closed the tunnel. Peleus died. But why? Peleus had said things about him having meaning and potential, but to give up his life for Urug? As his eyes adjusted to the dark, Urug found a tunnel that ran off from the main path. He approached it slowly until he stood just at the mouth of this tunnel. He looked in the direction that his newfound allies had gone, though they were already far from view. He could not go with them. He could not face them and their inevitable questions about what worth he had now, and why they should not kill him for costing them a valuable member of their team. It seemed clear to him now that he was on his own. He would find his own meaning now. That is the gift that Peleus had given him. The hours blended together as Urug shambled forward through the dark tunnels, relying on the heightened low-light vision native to his race. The stone walls all looked the same. Most of the way it felt as if he wasn't even moving, as if he were buried in stone, forced to walk in place for eternity. Though it felt like ages, eventually reprieve came from his tireless journey. As aches began to creep into his limbs and he felt like falling down and giving up, he saw a light. He was approaching the exit of this tunnel. Soon he emerged into the light of a new day, squinting against a bright morning sunrise. A forceful blow struck him in his stomach, sending him reeling to the ground. The world spun around him as he struck the earth. The wind was torn from his lungs as he heard the roar of some creature standing over top of him. He fumbled for his sword as the creature came into focus. Towering over him was a brown bear that stood at least 12 feet tall. It seemed cruel to Urug that he should be saved from death only to die here on the mountainside. Just as he began to fumble to draw his blade, Urug heard a woman's voice echoing a battle cry through the mountainside. The bear before him cried out in pain and then began to fall forward toward where Urug laid. As quickly as he could, Urug rolled to the side, just barely managing to evade the slain beast. He leapt to his feet and drew his sword, ready to defend himself against whatever new threat faced him. He could feel his jaw drop open at the sight that stood before him. Standing with one leg propped up on her kill was a young woman. Her ebony hair hung lazily in a mess around her shoulders. Pale green eyes stared fiercely at him. A wry smile adorned her soft face. In either hand, this woman bore 2 short, curved blades, held aloft and prepared for battle, just as he was. Still, she appeared relaxed, as if confident that she could not be overcome. She removed her foot from the bear's back as she strode towards his position. She studied him carefully for a moment. "You wear Dash armor, yet you have hardly a scar. Have I rescued a Dash or a man?" "I could have handled the bear," Urug said defiantly. "Didn't seem like it to me. What's wrong? You resent me for saving your hide?" Urug frowned. This woman was getting on his nerves. "Don't talk to me like that. I have far more prowess than you could imagine. Are you all talk, or should we let our blades do the talking?" The woman raised her twin blades anew and smiled at the challenge. "You haven't answered my question, but perhaps a duel might." Urug immediately charged forward, slashing his blade at her left shoulder, hoping to catch her by surprise with his speed. She was too quick for this. With great skill, she moved to the side and parried his blow, at the same time bringing her other blade around to counterattack. Urug was forced to leap backward from her attack. She came at him quickly, moving her blades to the air with ease as she spun around, attacking him. She moved with grace, as though she fought effortlessly. Urug knew that the length of his blade was his only advantage. Her speed and her dual blades meant that she could outpace any of his blows. He would have to catch her at a distance too far for her shorter blades to reach him. He continued to step back as she slashed at him, but she continued to step forward every time that he did. The sun moved across the sky as the two traded blows and moved continuously around the hillside. Urug felt the energy drain from him as sweat began to form on his body. Soon he was drenched, and could see the sweat on her brow as well. Despite himself, he smiled at how great a challenge she presented. There was something about this woman. Suddenly, Urug's feet caught on a stone while he was distracted, and he fell to his back. The woman did not waste her opening, but stepped hard on his sword arm as she brought her blade to his neck. For a moment they stood like this, both of them panting. Urug could see drops of sweat fall down from her onto his armor. "There's no doubt in my mind," she said, "that you have Dash in your blood. Yet you fight like a true warrior, which is enough to gain my respect." She lifted her foot and offered her hand to him. "There is something different about you, Half-Dash. I'd like to know what. We can start with your name. Mine is Kiran." Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. If you were Urug, would you have left the group or stayed with them? Till next time.